Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for October 8th, 2025. I'm going to call this meeting to order. And before we begin, I'm just going to ask you for a moment and reflection of the business at hand today. Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest at the table here? And seeing none, I'll just remind everybody that if that situation does arise, just please raise your hand and you can declare at any time. Moving on to number 4 of our agenda today, we have public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to provide the committee with their comments and questions. Presentations must be pre-arranged with legislative services before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about a specific agenda item at the meeting must register in advance with legislative services by 4 p.m. on October 7, 2025 by contacting clerk@meaford.ca or 519-538-1060 extension 1170. Presentations are limited to 10 minutes and deputations are limited to 5 minutes. And I do not see any presentations or deputations on the agenda today, so we can proceed past that. Next, number 5, we're going to be looking at approval of the minutes. And recommendation here is that the minutes of the August 13, 2025 meeting of the Heritage Advisory Committee must be approved as presented. And could I get do we do a motion first? Okay, could I get a motion to approve that first? Or motion to put that on the floor, I should say.
Just a motion to put it on the floor.
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Steve. Yes. Appreciate you holding me in line there. Can I just get a motion to put that item on the floor, please? Anybody? David, thank you very much. Okay. Comments, questions? David? It was David. Oh, a second. Could I get a second for that, please? Thank you, Nancy. Question. Go ahead, David. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I just had one, perhaps just a question on item number 6. Is that right? I got 6. Oh yes, to do with the permit for 226 Sake Street North. We had approved it with I guess a comment as to if there was any problems with structural deterioration that I guess would it have to come back to us to review if there was a structural deterioration? I'm thinking about it from the owner standpoint. Mm-hmm. They've removed the balcony and they've found that there's a problem with structure, hypothetically.
Sure.
What would be the next step?
That's a great question. Yeah. I'll leave that maybe to Denise.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it will depend on the situation. So for example, if there was was the structural issue related to what's holding up the rest of the front wall or something else related to that, or because I know that they were going to remove the balcony and you're saying the porch floor, if it wasn't going to stand up, is that just for clarification, like meaning that they may have to replace the entire thing?
I believe in that situation, they are intending on replacing the balcony and the main deck. And the concern was that upon removal of that structure, the deck and balcony, if there was something behind it, like the brick wall was failing, how would we know, or would the applicant still be able to just proceed with fixing the wall and then putting it up and everything's good?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to answer that question. So it will depend on the situation of that particular matter. So for example, say there was major upgrades that had to happen and that required a building permit. They may need, because it depends, like say they had to remove all the brick because it's all falling down and then they would probably have to come back to the committee for a second permit. If it was just some repairs, some reparging type stuff and shoring things up, then no, they are allowed to do some maintenance without any permit any additional permit. May be there are possibilities when you start, everyone who's done a renovation knows this, that you start moving things off and you find out it's worse than you thought. And so it would depend on that. So if it was going to impact any of those heritage attributes or anything beyond anything you would need a building permit for, they would likely require the person to come back at least to staff to see if a permit is required from a heritage perspective, because it's beyond what we looked at. And in some cases, we can issue a minor permit, internal, and in other cases, we may have to come back to the committee.
That my concern, not concern, I just, from the owner standpoint, I didn't want our comment to get built into major permits unless necessary. In other words, if there was a few bricks that were falling off, that they could still proceed, get the bricks fixed, and then put it in on their own without going through a whole permit issue. So I think that's what's said.
I totally understand through you, Mr. Chair. It makes a lot of sense. We wouldn't, and especially in these cases where people have repairs to do and then they have to wait and come back to another meeting. I don't think that would happen, and definitely putting some bricks back or even replacing a couple that fell off wouldn't necessarily need to come back to the committee.
That's great. So you're saying we just don't get in the way if we don't need to.
Exactly. That's really my point with exactly. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank
Do we have any other questions or comments with regards to the minutes? Wow. Okay, wonderful. So we're looking to approve the minutes. Could I get a motion to approve? Oh, we don't need to do that? Oh, okay, great. So if no more further questions or comments, all in favor? Great, thank you very much. And that is passed unanimously. All right, very good. So moving on to number 6. This is going to be very interesting, and unlike a lot of our other Heritage Committee meetings, is we have the educational session here. And item 6A, we have the Roles and Responsibilities Committee Code of Conduct. And we have a couple items for this item here, and I'll turn it over to staff and let you go right ahead. Thank you.
Just getting our slide. We've got a few presentations, so hopefully we'll get them all up, and
Very good.
there we go. And my eyes are really bad, so if I'm also looking at it on my computer, so I apologize. So if anyone else is like that, don't feel bad. Hopefully, and there are a couple of these slides that are really hard to see. These ones are not too bad because they're not too text heavy, but in my next one, it will be a little bit smaller. So the first presentation is just the general committee orientation. This is a repeat of the one we did about 1.5 years ago. So not everybody was here. Will and David weren't here. And as Simon mentioned last meeting or a couple meetings ago, hey, wouldn't be bad to do this over, because now that you've had some meetings under your belt, it might mean something different. So the same thing for you folks that have been for a couple of meetings. Hopefully you can benefit still from this orientation. But it is going to be pretty basic about how the committee runs and generally how we operate. So the first one is, or the first slide here with some details. I'm going to go through all of these things in some level of detail, not too much on the procedural bylaw because it would be very tiring. But you have a copy in your agenda package and you can go through it in greater detail. We'll go through the basics of it. So the committee establishing bylaw, that is the one that created the Heritage Committee. And every time we do a new Heritage Committee with the terms of council, or in this case, we did it a couple of years late, but we did another one with the terms of reference last year. We have a committee establishing bylaw. The procedural bylaw is how the committee operates. So how the agendas are done, how you operate in the meetings, and that is really how the committee's legislated to function. So if someone had a question for Sue about what we're allowed to do, she would be using that as her basis of giving advice. Then we're going to talk about what we like to short form it to MFIPA, which is really important to us in the municipal environment. It's the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And then we're going to talk a little bit about conflict of interest. And then we also had the code of conduct in this agenda package for you. And my thought would be we've never actually got around to signing it. So what I was thinking is we'll talk about it this meeting. And then if you don't mind signing it next meeting, which will be in December, then we'll have that wrapped up for at least for this term. And I don't believe we have an accessibility training, but in this original presentation, it was a component. We can talk a little bit about accessibility, but I don't think we have a presentation today. So the establishing bylaw, we created a new establishing bylaw, redoing the committee in May of this year with the terms of reference, and that was passed by council. So the committee prior to Will and John and everybody that was new being added, we and David, we had a couple of people who left the last committee. And during that time, there was quite a bit of work being done to update the terms of reference. There was a lot of interest in updating it and making it a little bit fresher for 10 years after we started this committee, knowing a few things that we wanted to really clarify. And so we worked really hard to try to get that done this year so that we had that refreshed. And that had all of the, why is the committee here and what is the responsibilities of the committee in it. The procedural bylaw, as I mentioned, it governs how council operates, and in this case, advisory committees as well. And it has everything from how do the meetings function, who chairs the meeting, and what are open meetings, what are closed meetings, how are minutes done, how are motions presented, and all of that. It's pretty detailed and long. And so some of it does not apply to the committee at all because it's really the functions of council. And then there's a section that definitely applies to the committee. So motions. So as we've heard today, we always, and don't feel bad if we forget, because we do forget from time to time how to complete a motion. It happens every once in a while, and how to do a mover and seconder. Council has more experience with this on the fly because they often change motions or add motions. I'm going to talk a little bit about doing that. The committee members have the ability to put out a motion as well on your own if there was something that you wanted to put on the floor for consideration. And so every motion needs a mover and a seconder, and that puts the motion out there for discussion. So we try not to discuss items that aren't on the floor, basically. And we call it on the floor, but that are not in front of us today. So if there's a change in a motion, when the motion's on the floor, someone can bring what we call a friendly amendment. Oh, could we add just something to that? Sometimes that happens during some of these permits, for example. Hey, it would be great if we also had, if they're taking something off, is it documented that they're removing features that got rotted? We'd like that documented for preservation, at least for us to be aware of. Those are the types of things that sometimes committees add. And so they can be done, which we like to call a friendly amendment. It's not changing the general amendment or the general motion. So the motion might be to approve, but maybe the committee wants to add a little bit of wording just to clarify. And that's where that amendment could happen midway. If someone in the committee wanted to add something for consideration, it isn't something that we usually do within a meeting. So the agenda's been published and now all of a sudden someone has an amazing idea. You wouldn't just blurt out your idea at some point in the meeting, but you could say, I'm actually considering, hey, I'd like to do a plaque program. I'm just wondering if we can get some information on how we might do that and put a motion. So that's where the notice of motion. So if you wanted to add something, you could do it at that committee inquiries section. And then we would bring back to the next meeting that motion. So we would clean it up and make sure it's in good shape. And Councillor Ford will be well aware of that because councillors bring those all the time of things that they've heard from the public or things that they've heard from the world that they say, you know, we should be working on something or we want to have more information, but they can't just ask us to do that in the meeting on the fly. So they bring a notice of that motion and it gives us time to kind of craft the motion and get the work started. In this case, we would, at the agenda review meeting, kind of wordsmith that and make sure that we have that in good shape with the advice of the person who wants to make that motion. So if Jan wants to bring up some idea that she's had, Jan could do a notice of that at that committee's inquiry section. And then we would work with Jan separately, or sorry, Nancy separately to fix it, you know, fix it up and make sure it makes sense to what Nancy's idea was. And then we would have it on the next agenda. And then every member of the committee has a vote. So if you're present, it's understood that you're voting. So in this case, it gives an example of if you don't vote in favor of something, then it's automatically against it. Often we do ask to understand who's against it. So if it's like who opposed and then people raise their hand, but if you don't vote in favor of it, then you're voting in the negative. And if there is a tie vote, that means that motion's defeated. And then it just mentions in the procedures that it's by a show of hands. So you know that you're putting your hand up. The agenda review meeting is something that is a little bit new to the committee. We've been doing it for a little while. And we have that meeting to discuss what's going to end up on the agenda to make sure we're all on the same page and understand it 2 weeks before the meeting. So 2 weeks ago from today, we had an agenda review meeting where we talked about the contents of today's meeting and made sure we understood what content was going to be on there today. And it's usually attended by the chair. Sometimes the chair brings a member of the committee, and then usually I'm present or someone instead of me, and Sue or whoever is the committee coordinator. It's been different people over time, and so I haven't always been the staff resource either. So we have brought members of the committee to some of those meetings to help provide some content and understanding of what the agenda review would be. And then, as you know, the agenda gets published the following week. So here's the general outline of how the agenda would look. Obviously, there are some slight differences depending on the content. This week, we had a special training session added. And so you should be pretty familiar with this by now, kind of seeing how they flow. And the items for consideration, for example, would be where we would put the heritage permits or any other work that we're asking for the committee's direction on, and we want more from you. And that way, you know that you're going to be making some kind of motion on it. Items for information or where you will make a motion probably to receive something, but you won't be necessarily approving anything. And then we would be able to discuss those items as well. So here we'll go back to some of this again. In preparation for meetings, we have the agenda review meeting 2 weeks before. The agenda is published a week before, and then the meeting day. So we've just asked that, you know, you can use the online resources to look at the agenda. You can download it from there. You can just use it in our system. So you don't have to download it if you don't want to. You can just look at it in your browser. And so those are ready in advance of the meeting about 1 week. I guess it's 1 week before. And if you have any questions on that, you're free to ask staff what your questions are if something isn't making sense to you, or you need more information based on what sometimes we're not great and perfect about what the information we've provided to you. So we're happy to answer any questions. And then on the meeting day, we ask that if you for some reason find out that you can't attend, please let us know that you're not going to be attending. And that way we can have a heads up about things like quorum. We don't have the ability to do hybrid meetings, which in our case would mean some folks are here in person and some are virtual. We don't really have the technology set up to do that hybrid. It can be quite clunky because in this case, if if David's not here and he's virtual, we've noticed it's hard to see and hear his participation. For example, if you were on vacation in Spain and wanted to still be here, we would probably have to cancel those meetings and then just reschedule when we had quorum. So because of that, it's really important to know if someone can't make it. And then I know Sue's been trying her best to get those minutes done. And so we hope to have them posted following the meeting, if possible, in draft so that you can see them ahead. But then, of course, they're always going to be in the agenda as well. All the meetings are live streamed on YouTube and that they're archived. So you can go back and look at any of the ones you're interested in going back and looking at. Occasionally I have to go back and look at them just to see what we talked about, because it's not always as detailed in the minutes, of course, as it is in the live stream about what folks is, I'll say, feelings are more private, more obvious in the live stream than they are in the recording. So if there were concerns or there was a lot of interest in something, it may not show up, but sometimes it's good to go back and take a look at some of those bigger projects. I certainly did that when I was reviewing what was the past work on the report that's coming in a little while, the one on the district update. I wanted to go back through and look at some of the live streams and some of the minutes about what happened in those other discussions. We weren't recording those ones didn't do a live stream or a record from a few years ago when that project started. So I didn't have the benefit of that record, but I did review the minutes. So watching the video is super helpful. And it just notes here that about quorum, it's important to remember that quorum is what we consider 50 members plus one. So in our case, we normally would have a 7-member committee. So it would be 4 people to be quorum. And so if we're down a member, that can make it challenging because we're already a little bit short. So in this case, we're down our member when Jan left. So we've got 6 people, but if we had a couple people sick, that would put us in a tough spot. And so, yes, a quorum of members, this is important to remember that a quorum of committee members are not to discuss business outside of formal meetings. So you can't get together and go out for lunch and talk about heritage matters as a group, because that would be considered a meeting because you're on this formal committee. So if you weren't on this committee, you could go ahead and do that, and it would just be a common interest with friends. In this case, because we're in this sanctioned committee, we can't do that. And that's because of the rules under the Municipal Act. Let's see. So, yep, it just talks about members sitting in the horseshoe. So staff sit over on this side of the horseshoe and the committee members sit just like council would. If you're speaking, we need you to turn on your microphone, not because we can't hear, but because it won't be recorded in the live stream. So when we look back at the YouTube video, we can't hear what people are saying. And I can confirm that happened a couple of times in the last month or so in other meetings where someone just forgot to put their mic on and it's just silent on the video. So it's really important for the YouTube video to be able to hear what people are saying and have that, because otherwise it's just no one can tell what's happening. So just if you can remember, if we remind you, don't feel bad. It happens a lot that people forget, even those of us that are using it all the time. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that, just looking at here about presentations that are provided in advance. So when someone is doing a presentation of the committee, we could certainly take presentations from members of the public or for ones that are a developer who wants to show us something. And then we would be able to show it in the agenda and display it on the screen. They have to be prepared in advance with the committee coordinator or clerk's division in general. And then anything that, if someone has paper copies of something, then it's not able to be displayed. So if someone came in with, a drawing or something about their property, there would be no way for us to show it on a screen at that time if they showed up at the meeting with it, which does happen. And this was just a reminder about how valuable all of you are in participating, and that, you know, as volunteers, we know that your time is really important, and it's hard to get volunteers for things like committees, and we really appreciate it. So all your participation is extremely valuable. All questions are good questions. We're here to help. Members of council can help. So Councillor Forder is definitely a great resource to the committee and to as that council liaison as well. Council created this committee because they want your input. And so it's really important to give you this forum to be able to participate and provide that expertise to council. It's really important in that decision-making process. So just as a reminder, yes, you're advisors to council on the topic of heritage. They make decisions based on your recommendations and your input. So definitely feel free to keep participating and ask great questions. And council may not always agree, which has happened, you know, in a recent heritage permit. They added some additional conditions, and they don't necessarily always approve all recommendations of the committees. But that doesn't mean that it's not important work that you're doing. A little bit about MFIPA. So this Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act is such an important act to us because it means that all the work that we do is subject to this act, and only certain things cannot be shared. So anything, emails that you give to us, if you email a question, or if a developer is asking questions or providing documents, all that stuff is public information. And the only information that's not public and is subject to the privacy part of the act are things that are personal information. And that information is spelled out there. And of course, I'm not clicking myself along, so I can barely read it, but I know what it is. It's the stuff that makes your personal life specific to you. So these are things about you, like your race, your medical history, where you live, your phone number, those sorts of things. Your personal name is considered personal information where it's tied to one of these other things. So for example, your name and address, because your address is on there, your address on its own isn't personal, but as soon as it's tied to your name, it's personal information. So if someone were to ever ask, so if they did a Freedom of Information request, and there was personal information for anybody on the committee in that request. So say it was like, we want to know everybody's who's on the committee and we want to know where they live. The clerk's department would not give that information out. So they would be able to list the names of the committee members because that's public information. It's even on our website right now about who is on the committee, but not where you live, not, you know, health information or any of those other things that are on there. So just being aware of that. But anytime we send an email, we always think about that. Hey, all of this is subject to freedom of information. And so we're always cognizant of professionalism and all of that. So we encourage you to do the same. So the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act is one that's interesting because when we perceive a conflict of interest, it's not the same as what is in the act. So the act is there to protect the public interest for transparency and accountability in that decision-making process so that people who are being influenced by their own conflict of interest aren't making a decision or directly influencing a decision. But it is specific to pecuniary interests for the most part. So it prohibits members from who have a pecuniary interest in acting in a decision-making capacity and removing themselves from involvement. And that pecuniary interest is very specific. So usually it's something that of your own, if you had a business or something that was related to one of the files that we were dealing with, or if it was a direct family member or something like that. And we have a list of some of those things there. We can help direct you to some resources. Should you ever wonder, I think I might have a conflict of interest and I'm not sure, reach out to us and we will give you the resources you need to figure out. And at any time you can realize that you have one and declare it, and we can help you with that as well. So I believe there's a form to fill out if that's the case, which I don't see on here right now. Maybe disclosure form. Yeah, so it's on there. So we can provide that to you if that comes up. And sometimes people realize midway, oh wait, actually I'm I'm actually have a conflict.
Yes, well, question?
A question here. It says a family member. Is that, does that really agree with what you're talking about? Because a family member, say, would be what, your wife? Or your son or cousins? Where does the family member go?
It's a really good question through you, Mr. Chair. That's a really important one. We've struggled with that a little bit. It's usually where you have a direct financial relationship. So for example, if your daughter who lives with you is in business with someone and you're somehow a shareholder in that company, or you're living in that same household, it makes sense. Or if it's a wife or spouse or something like that, because your financial interests are combined, right? But it is meant to be where there's a monetary component. So if someone's your cousin, that doesn't mean you have a pecuniary interest, even though they're a family member. There is some nuance here, so there are lots of questions that could come up. And so we would just encourage you to let us know what the situation is. We have folks that can help with that. And we can direct you further when we kind of understand what is the situation. These do come up a lot. And one of the reasons it comes up as a question, and it has over the years that I've been doing municipal governance, is in a small community like ours, people have a lot of relationship with neighbors and people that they work, we've had planning applications where the applicant is my dentist or something like that, but it isn't a pecuniary interest in that case, right? So I am able to still process something, but sometimes it does still give a level of discomfort for somebody, and you're still able to recuse yourself if you feel that discomfort. I'm not sure if Councillor Forder wants to weigh in on any examples that he may have where it was a little bit gray, but those ones come up quite a bit, and I'm sure you may have, Mr. Chair, some examples of that where it's been like, oh, you might have sought an opinion on that, and then, or we've seen it in some of the other council members too, where there's a relationship that's a little bit too hard to determine, so that person has chosen to declare, just for transparency.
And I think, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I had where I was confused about conflict of interest. But I always went to the integrity commissioner for advice on that first, just so I could make sure that it was, there was a clear decision that was made on it. Well, I can't maybe give an example, but I think you're spot on with how you're explaining that. And Will, that's a great question about how far it goes down the family tree. But if you have a follow-up, please go ahead.
I have a follow-up question. At a later time, if it's we find out or we decide, okay, they voted, but they actually had a peak. I don't know how to pronounce it, an interest there. Does the vote then go back? Or is the vote that they voted on, is it scrapped and they start again with a vote?
Very good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. Denise, maybe you do.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So through you, I've never seen this come up. I have read some news stories, I'll say, where this has come up, where it's come out later that actually, there's a council member and their spouse is a business partner with something that the person had made a decision on. I don't think it would necessarily scrap that vote. And the good news is in this case, but it's a good question. I think in this case, because mostly this committee is making recommendations to council versus actually making the decision, it probably will come up less for you. But I'm happy to just dig into that a little bit and maybe bring that back to a follow-up meeting if that's helpful, because this is kind of getting into a little bit of a gray area that I'm not sure about, but I think it's worth bringing that back to perhaps check in with our clerk's department and maybe find out if there's a little bit more information on that. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm clear on that. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. All right. And now for some reason it's not advancing on me. Oh, there we go. Aha. It worked. So some other notes. These are just reminders. So if you are getting emails from us, we're asking not to reply all, to ask any questions, just reply to the person that originated that email to you. So if it's from Sue or myself, and that correspondence should be provided through staff resources. So if I'm the staff resource of the committee and you want to ask a question, feel free. Hey, I read this report and I have some questions about this. I will make sure that everyone gets the information back. I'll bring it to the committee. So because I think that has happened a few times where someone was unclear about something that was written. And if you wait until the meeting, it's sometimes a little hard to get that information. So if there was something unclear, please feel free to let me know and I will bring it back to the whole committee, or I will let the whole committee know about, hey, there was a schedule to the report that was unclear. I've replaced it or I've distributed a new one. Because it has happened. We've had a couple that were blurry and someone couldn't see it, but if you wait till the meeting, it's a little bit too late. So it's always great to, review your agenda. And if you see something a little bit funny or weird, let me know. Or if you have a follow-up question, let me know and we'll see if we definitely get questions from the committee members from time to time about just for clarity. Or even just, hey, I saw something, was there a permit on this one or things like that? We're happy to help. So yeah, generally after the agenda is published, we can't add additions. And so because of that, like I said, it's great if you can let us know as soon as possible. We can bring information to the meeting to make sure it's transparent in the meeting. And we just provide a link here to where the information is if you want to find additional calendar and other things. There's a link there. And this is the end of this presentation, which is more the corporate one. Any questions on this?
Yes, Nancy, please go ahead.
My question is about confidentiality. Is there any areas that we have to be concerned about confidentiality in our discussions in the committee, with outside members of the community?
That's a really good question through you, Mr. Chair. Confidentiality, I think in application form, there isn't a lot of confidentiality because everything's public. So most of what planning services does is public information. Anyone can come and look in the file. I mean, we don't have paper files much anymore. We have mostly electronic, but any of the documents in the files are available for the public to look at. If there's any personal information in those files, we're able to redact that portion, but generally the file itself is public. So if someone were, to Nancy's question about some of these things we deliberate on, have an application for, say, a renovation or a new build, almost all of that information is public information. The difference would be if someone said, I don't want my email given out, it might be on that application form and could redact that out if they requested it. And then that wouldn't be public information. But everything that the committee members would have would be public as well. So we wouldn't give you anything that you had to worry about protecting because all of that stuff would be public information under the MFIPA. Anything that isn't, occasionally I can think of a situation where we might give out application information. And then after someone says, oh, wait, I didn't want my telephone number on there because I don't want the public to see that, we could take it out and we might let you know, hey, we've redacted this. But generally that hasn't happened lately, but it could. And I don't believe we've been giving you the full applications anyways, but that's one of the reasons is because there does tend to be a lot of personal information in there, like their phone number and their home address might be there because the address of the property we're looking at may not be their actual home address. And so some of that stuff can be things that people want to protect. So we haven't been giving out the full application to everybody. Each application that comes in, we've been giving you summaries for that reason.
That's a very good question, Nancy. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other further questions or comments? Before we proceed, I just want to, Denise, thank you and your team for putting all of this together. I know it's not a little amount of work. So I just want to thank you in advance for putting this all together. It's extremely helpful. And of course, thanks for all your guidance and expertise. But I think we are ready to move on to the next educational piece, which is the Meaford Heritage Committee Training 2025 document.
Here we go. Oh. Thanks. Thank you so much, Sue. All right, so this is the one I think is more fun. I mean, you may feel differently because this is the one that's more about the planning related part of this committee. So here I've just provided an overview of our heritage conservation program, heritage permits in Meaford, and then so our reporting structure for how we review those and how we bring them to you. And then I gave a little planning 101. It's very brief because I don't want to, make you have to have a super heavy duty stuff to look at in one afternoon, but give you a little bit about what we do and then a resource list. So that would be for further reading. And if anyone needed anything printed out, we'd be happy to print it for you too, because I've given links. And if those are broken or if there's a problem with them, let me know as well. So, and some of this, just as a reminder, we're going to have Bert Close do the training next month, and he's going to go over some of this as well. And he does a really great explanation of this technical side of heritage conservation under the Act. So he's going to get into all of that. So I'm not going to touch on what is heritage value and all of that because Bert's training is much more in depth on that. So that will be really valuable. But I'm going to get at that very high level. So Meaford in particular protects heritage properties in two ways. So we have Part 4 designated properties. These are ones under Part 4 of the Act. These are individual properties that have been designated by a bylaw under the Heritage Act. And those are listed on our municipal heritage register. And I actually showed Haley, who's beside me today. Haley is our planning technician. And so we were looking at the heritage register recently and talking about the district mapping and things like that, because folks sometimes do ask, can you let me know if I'm a designated property or can you confirm I am or I'm not? And so those are important things to make sure that we have available. The Municipal Heritage Register is required to be on the website now. And so we have that list on there. It's a very short list. I believe it's 4 properties and that's all. And some of those properties are actually designated in the next section. And that is the Part 5 section. That's the Heritage District section. So Part 5 of the Act allows us to put a heritage district together and designate a whole area. And some of those properties are not necessarily heritage, but they're forming part of an area that we considered unique and special enough to designate as a district. We've seen a few of those properties that come up through a heritage permit where we think, well, this one's not a heritage building or it's a vacant lot, for example. But because it's in the district, we look at those policies of the overarching district plan and say, hey, how does this fit in? What do they have to do when they want to build or put something in this or take something down in this district? So the downtown district plan and guidelines is our guiding document for the district. It doesn't apply to individual property designation at all. The individual property designation, the bylaw itself is what we would use to guide us. And then further to the district, we have that boundary, and it's quite large in our particular district. It includes the harbor, the downtown area, the waterfront along Bayfield, and some of the side streets. And sorry for the text, I'm thinking from an accessibility, that's probably not good contrast, but
Sorry,
this
Denise,
is
apologize. I just think Will wanted to jump in with a question here. Sorry, go ahead, Will.
I have a question. I saw a poster when I was in the building about the BIA. Now, the BIA, if it actually goes forward downtown, are they going to have a representative here, or are we going to have a representative there for their meetings? Because BIA, that's pretty well everybody downtown, and everybody downtown has to come anything that is with regards to their building has to come to this committee anyway. So is that something that you're looking at?
So, Mr. Chair, it's a really good question that I actually hadn't thought of about ensuring that, I mean, there's a couple of things that trigger as soon as Will's mentioned this. And one of the things is, the first thing is that we've never had any cross-pollination between the BIA and the Conservation District in terms of meetings. So we didn't go to their BIA meetings. BIA members didn't necessarily have a role because often they don't. I mean, I think one of the struggles with the BIA previously was keeping the committee going. So the BIA's board was having a hard time with capital, like human capital, making sure there's enough people there that are doing the work. And so that was one of the struggles with the BIA the last time. So I doubt that we would end up having a member on the committee. However, that's certainly something we wouldn't be opposed to having that representation. But what I was thinking as Will's asking these questions is, could we, is if the BIA does reform, could we work with them better to give them the resources they need for their membership about how our process works to make sure that they have an easier way to access the tools that we have. So things like permits when you don't need a permit, how this process works. And we'd be happy to maybe do a presentation to the BIA or even the chamber, if that's helpful, if that's the avenue that would make more sense, to help them understand what the Heritage Committee does and what our district does. Because it's something I hadn't thought of before, and maybe Haley could do me a favor and just like make a note for me since she's writing. I don't know if that's too much to ask. Haley, just let me know about that, because it's something that I would like to follow up on. But I'm not really sure where we are with that process. I know we've had some initial meetings to gauge the BIA area or potential area. And but I haven't heard anything beyond that. But it is a good question, especially in terms of how we can to work together with a BIA in the future if a BIA is reestablished.
And that's a very good suggestion, Will. And my understanding is that there are many municipalities where there's a BIA and a crossover with a heritage conservation district, is that many members, or for instance, like the BIA chair would be not a voting member, but would regularly attend Heritage Advisory Committee meetings as a guest or a delegate, for instance, but they wouldn't necessarily be a voting member of the committee itself. But that cross-pollination, my understanding is common practice in many municipalities where you have that overlap. But for Meaford, that actually could be a very good fit if the BIA is something that does end up taking off. Did you have a follow-up or anything, Will?
No, otherwise.
Still forget your microphone.
If we don't have a representative, they don't have a representative, maybe either their minutes come here or our minutes go to them. Does that sound reasonable to
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
chair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think one of the things we could do is have, I mean, if they were interested, so say the BIA is established, we could ensure that one of the members or the chair, et cetera, are part of the subscription for the agenda going out. And then they would have access to the minutes and the agendas. I think those are great suggestions that I feel bad for not having thought of before. So I really appreciate these comments.
Very good.
So here is our document. This document has not been updated since 2014, other than the district boundary was adjusted through the OMB decision. So this Heritage District Plan was approved by council in 2014, and then it was appealed to the OMB. Which is now the OLT, but it was the OMB at the time. The reason was that one of the churches got added kind of I'll call it last minute, into the district boundary, which was not part of the original consultation. And they objected to that. So that actually got removed. And what we have now doesn't include it. It was the United Church. And so as it is now, it hasn't changed since it was basically in effect January 2015. We're going to talk a little bit in another in another report about updating it, but just letting you know that we have been working with these for just over 15 years. Every advisory committee that is relaunched is kind of just using these same ones. We haven't, like I said, haven't updated it, but we've received a lot of feedback over the years that we've been working to incorporate into the update. The very first advisory committee got launched in that spring of 2015 when this plan got put in place. It's very unusual for a municipality to have a district without a heritage advisory committee because there is so much work to do when you do have a district. So the primary need of the committee has been to deal with matters within the district and the permits that result. And then, of course, I got ahead of myself. So it hasn't been updated since 2015. We did have a public meeting to consider updates in 2023. We got to a certain stage, but we haven't advanced further, and that's something that we'll be picking up following my report later on in the meeting. Here's a picture of what the district looks like. So as you can see on the right-hand side, you're seeing the entirety of the harbor, including all the way down to the end of the rock wall, because it's all one parcel. It includes all of the downtown and all of the side streets around the downtown and I believe, okay, so zooming into my mind here, I can hardly see it, but on Trowbridge Street, it goes all the way to Cook Street. So that would include, you know, the municipal office all the way down to the corner at Cook Street. You see it does a little bit of a zigzag there. So for the most part, that straight line on the left-hand side is following that downtown, the back of the buildings. And so the back of the properties, trying not to go through anybody's property halfway. So that's why it looks as it does. And then on the other part to just note is along Boucher Street, it sort of ends at the trail. So if anyone's familiar with where the Georgian Trail is, that's where it ends, and it kind of follows in behind. It's a little bit of the map's not perfect, but that's what it follows, is the trail there, generally speaking. So it is a huge area, and it includes a variety of different types of properties. So I did update this. So we had this slide from the last training, which was in 2014. I added 2015, 2020, 2024s. So I added 2025's heritage permits. So as you can see, they do go up and down quite a bit. Not sure what was happening in 2019. I wasn't here then, but we had a whole bunch. And I think last year we had quite a few too, but most of them were signs. So most of them were new signs for businesses. I'm not sure how much time you spend downtown, but there's a lot of new businesses that came in during last year. So there were a number of new signs that we issued permits for. So staff issued those as a delegated approval, as long as it met the general requirements of the sign bylaw and it met the district plan's general guidelines around signs. So those are things like they weren't backlit signs, like big neon signs or anything like that. They were within the sign band area where it's the traditional area. If someone wanted to do something unusual, then it would have to come to the committee. So to date, we have 7, which isn't too bad. It's been reasonably busy this year, and I believe the next meeting will probably have a couple updates about some delegate approvals and hopefully a permit. I think there's one in the works right now, but that's where we've been, sort of the history since 2015. So this slide I recognize is hard to read from this particular slide, but don't worry, I'll be breaking it down in the next couple of slides. This is just kind of giving you an overview of how permits get processed. So I'll go through them each section in detail a little bit. And then this one just lets you know, like, where is your role? It's right in that middle. So it's kind of in that, we'll call it step 2. So when the application comes in and we start working, this committee works in that step 2. So you haven't got a council decision, your pre-council decision where you're going to give council some guidance. So the first step, someone applies. So sometimes they meet with us or they call us, ask us some questions, and then they submit their application. So they submit it to us and then we set up a file and we start doing a little bit of a review, like what's in this application? Are the pictures clear? Do we understand what they're asking for? And then when we feel like most of the information is there or the information that we're supposed to have is there, we issue a notice of receipt. We've received it and we're starting to work on it. And that notice of receipt is important because that starts the clock for the timelines under the Heritage Act. Then we start preparing the report to the Heritage Committee and we of course put it on the agenda. The committee would hear the application and receive a report on it, ask questions, have a discussion. Applicants can appear and speak to you about their applications. Other folks can appear if they want as well. And then the committee would make a recommendation to council and your options are to approve with conditions, or recommend approve with conditions, or refuse. Then staff would prepare a report to council, giving the Heritage Committee's recommendations. Occasionally we've had some things change between the recommendations and the council meeting. I know there was one where the Heritage Committee asked for something and really felt strongly about something. And I was just reviewing that one recently. And on that particular one, it was a downtown building where the Heritage Committee had said, we prefer it to be this way or that way. And that would be our recommendation, that they move something or make it this way, certain attributes. And the applicant actually did make those changes in between. And then when it went to council, it had the updated drawings. That wouldn't be the typical, because usually we would try to get those sorts of things ahead, anticipate what the committee might want. Not in all cases would we be able to do that, but we try to get as much from the applicants ahead of time. We try to have them conform to the district plan's guidelines as much as possible. In this particular case, the applicant didn't necessarily want to do that. And so after hearing from the committee, they did make that change. And then what went to council was basically with their recommendations included. And then council would make a decision after receiving our report, and they would decide to either approve with conditions, or refuse the permit. At that stage, staff has to do some paperwork. We have to issue a notice of decision, and we include, if they've approved the permit with conditions or without conditions, we would have to include a permit. And then it's important for us to close the loop on that and make sure all the paperwork is done, because there is appeal rights on the part of the owner. So if they don't like the conditions, or if they don't get the permit, they can appeal that. I don't believe we've ever had a refused permit that I can think of, but it always could happen. I mean, obviously our goal is to try to have projects that conform with the district policies. And so we try to work with someone to change their project so it would conform, it can be approved. So we hope to not have to bring you things that are, I'll call them half-baked ideas, where you're going to hate them and think, we can't approve this, we can't recommend this. We work really hard to try to get things in front of you that we've already kind of raised some of the things, and learning over time what committees have, what kind of feedback we've gotten better and better at trying to get applicants to take some of that feedback in at the early stage before we even get it to you. And now on to our favorite part, the planning 101. So it's often asked of me, where does heritage fit within the process? So we're in a bit of a top-down hierarchy when it comes to planning. So we start with provincial legislation. We've got the Planning Act, the Municipal Act, the Heritage Act, the Building Code Act all apply to us. There's other ones as well, things like the Development Charges Act, Environmental Protection Act. There's a few other ones as well that come into play. And then the Planning Act has a section to authorize policy creation on the part of the province. So they do that in the form of a provincial policy statement. There's also ones related to protection of heritage resources separately as well, but the provincial policy statement or provincial planning statement in our case has heritage resources within their policy structure. And then that lets us create our own local policy. So we have an official plan that includes heritage policies in it and also gives us the ability to have heritage conservation like a district plan and all of that in the policy. That enabling policy is important because without it, we wouldn't have been able to create the district. And then we would input in place things that are more bylaw related. We have, obviously establishing our committee, which we've talked about earlier in the meeting, property standards bylaws, zoning bylaws, procedural bylaw. These are the things that enable us to have some teeth around the work that we do, that requirements that aren't just policy or guiding documents. And then we have other tools. So site plan control is one that I bring up sometimes as an example, because for example, if someone was doing a new grocery store downtown, I mean, I don't know where that would fit, but that would be cool if they were. It would be under site plan control, being a commercial building. And the committee might give some recommendations into that process and suggest a specific type of facade material, street furniture, or landscaping that would add to the district. So those are the kinds of things that have happened in the past. Like another one that comes to mind is the Sarley, I call it the Sarley one. I think it's called Meaford or Elements of Meaford. Does that ring a bell? Elements of Meaford, I think is what it's called now, but that is the Collingwood Street multi-unit development, and it's got a commercial component on the ground floor. That one came to the committee and lots of feedback was given. And so as part of their heritage permit, there was feedback given, which was on the general outline of what they were planning to do. And those sorts of things can then be included in a site plan agreement. So it's not just your feedback. Yes, we recommend approval of a permit, but some of those things actually became required by an agreement, a legal agreement with the municipality. So they have to put in place as part of their approval. And then, so the answer to where does heritage fit, the short answer, because I've just been really long-winded, is in all those levels. So at every level, there are heritage, either policy or frameworks that allow us to have heritage conservation. Like I said, in provincial legislation, because we have an act, we have policies at the provincial level, we have our local policies, our local bylaws, and our other tools. So we have heritage things built into all of that. And then I gave you a list of resources, and I don't expect you, like, I'm not going to test you on whether you read the Heritage Act next meeting. It's all of that legislation is very dry. But if you wanted to take a look at what we have on our Heritage website page and you thought, hey, this isn't a very good page, like we should have more things or better pictures, or if you have feedback, we're happy to have that. I let you know that the Heritage Register is there and where to find the district plan and guidelines should you want to share it with others and say, hey, it's on our website. If anyone said, well, where is this plan? And then I did have the procedural bylaw is built into, and the terms of reference are in the meeting in a different spot. So I didn't put a link there. And then there's some further reading. And one thing I wanted to highlight for you in this, so there's the Ontario Heritage Trust. And I wanted to tell you that the Ontario Heritage Toolkit was just updated. So in our previous heritage training, we heard from Bert about how the Heritage Toolkit was the greatest ever and it's out of date, but was still good. We could still use it. the good news is we don't have to use anything out of date anymore because they finally updated it. So I was taking a look at it and it was really good. I was really impressed with it. It's all on their website now. So it used to be a book that you could walk around with. Now it's the website and it's got multiple pages. So it was really good. We've got the zoning bylaw on our website. It's an online mapping tool in there we call our portal. And in the portal, the Heritage Conservation District is a layer that you can click on so you can see where, with some actual more detailed mapping versus the one that I showed you earlier where you can't really see any properties. This one, you'd be able to look at property by property if you wanted to take a look at that tool. And if anyone is wondering, like, I've looked at these and I can't find what you're talking about, and you wanted to book some time for us to show you at the counter, we're happy to show you some of those resources. I've linked the updated challenges and opportunities report as well. We will probably be referencing that next meeting when we show you the draft Heritage District update. And then the Meaford Property Standards bylaw, I know Bert in his training will talk a little bit about it. It is one of the only property standards bylaws that we know of municipally that actually has heritage matters in it. And the reason that that is important is because property standards bylaws are there to protect public safety, for example, and other things. So they talk about things like long grass and all of that, but they also, if parts of a building were falling down onto the street, they would make that owner fix that so that it was safe. However, it's set up more for safety. So often property standards bylaws are in conflict with district plans or heritage policies because they're saying, hey, there's a heritage brick feature and it's falling down on the sidewalk, you better take it off. Whereas when you have heritage matters built in, it says, no, if they're heritage features, you need to protect them and you have to make sure that they're structurally sound. So you can't just take it down. Just because it's falling down, because unfortunately that would lead to more of that, what we call demolition by neglect, where someone just leaves it to rot and then it's falling down and then we go around and our bylaw department goes and says, take this down because it's not safe. And they're thinking, great, that's what I wanted to do. Our bylaw has been updated to include heritage considerations, which we're very, very proud of. It's something that I think we did as a project with the Heritage Committee's help way back and was years ago now. I want to say something like 8 years ago. It's something that we are really proud of that Meaford has that not everybody has. And that is the end of my long-winded planning one. We've got a bunch of other resources here that we can talk a little bit about. I don't expect to go through the terms of reference in great detail because we just passed it. But I'm happy to answer questions on it if someone wasn't clear, and we can go through the procedural bylaws super quickly.
Sure. Yeah, Denise, I think just maybe a brief overview of the procedural bylaw. Don't have to get into too much detail perhaps, but just maybe a general overview if you wouldn't mind. Thank you kindly.
And so I don't mind just like whipping through it. Everyone should have a copy, with their package as well. So it's set up to set up the procedures of the committee. The part of it will apply mostly to council. So it's got the framework of why we're doing this, and then it talks about some definitions of, what is the act? It's the municipal act. What's an advisory committee? It means this. So it goes through all of those things and then sets up how the committee would function. So scrolling to things that I think are more particular to the committee, things like quorum, it has what does that mean in there? How to do motions, some of the things that we talked about, the duties of the chair. So in part 2, it has the duties of the chair being, opening the meeting, calling it to order, announcing business, receiving motions by members, making sure the votes happen and things like that. And then it talks about, the conduct of the members. It talks about, obviously that's important. But we have a separate code of conduct that we can talk about next. Being respectful. I mean, this committee is very respectful, so don't even need to do that kind of reminder. it lays out, just gonna say what the difference between an open and closed meeting. I mean, this committee won't have closed meetings, but closed meetings would be ones that aren't happening in an open manner where the public are invited. So anybody, any member of the public could come to these meetings and sit in the gallery right now because they're advertised on our website and the door is unlocked. And also because they're broadcast, so anyone can see them. So there are so many ways that they're transparent. But a closed meeting would be where the committee wasn't publishing an agenda, wasn't making transparent about what kind of work was happening, and wasn't happening it necessarily in this forum. There's a bunch of examples of different types of meetings that doesn't have anything to do with the work of this committee, more of council ones like emergency meetings and electronic meetings and things like that. So I won't get into too much about that. When I go, I'm scrolling, trying to get to that section where it talks about it. It talks about the order of business for in the procedural bylaw is mainly for council because you folks have the benefit of a terms of reference, which gives you more details about how this committee functions that council doesn't. So you wouldn't be doing all of the same sections, but it does go through all of those. And what it explains what presentations mean and what deputations mean and when we would allow for those and how long people have to present to us, how early they have to tell us ahead that they want to be a presenter. We have had some people deputate on items that we might be considering this committee, which they're able to do. And I don't think we've had any public questions, but I think we're still able to have those. Just trying to get to the further down. I'm going to skip the closed session. Talks a little bit about what the minutes have in them. How to vote, voting procedure. How to do motions. There's a lot of content here. And so, you know, and how to have discussion and debate and points of order and things like that. So it goes through all of those to make sure that how meetings are conducted are with decorum and are somewhat parliamentary. So everyone takes a turn and all of that. Under part 7, it talks about committees more specifically and just gives council the ability to strike committees and dissolve committees for different tasks. And that's about it. So it is a bit of a dry one, but it is something that we refer to when something weird is going on and we think someone says, well, hey, I don't know if I did that motion correctly, or I don't know if we amended a motion correctly. And then we would rely on the procedural bylaw, which in the clerk's division, they use quite a bit. We use it a little bit in committee of adjustment as well. We have our own procedural bylaw, kind of similar, and it's important to have that so we know how to function should something weird happen, or if someone just decides they want to reorder agendas one day and not have them the way that they've always been. The agenda general format is built into some of this. In our case, it's built into the terms of reference as well. Which I can flip into now. So we established that terms of reference in May, which set up our new terms of reference about how the committee was going to operate, how many members we would have, what the point of the committee was, which is great. It gives both what I think Bert will do a really good job talking about, which is the statutory role of the committee versus the non-statutory. The statutory role is really related to permits and advising council on heritage matters related to the act. And the non-statutory would be other things that you might want to do, like other types of research or other projects. The examples in here are things like promoting heritage conservation, as well as advising property owners on appropriate conservation and maintenance practices. An example from the past that we did was we created a little bit of a toolkit for folks who wanted to do repairs for masonry that we I don't want to say stole it, but we borrowed it from another municipality that had an amazing one that we just used. I believe it was the city of Kingston, but I can't remember now, or maybe it was the city of London, that we just said, hey, if you were wondering about how to clean brick without damaging it, here's a great guide. But some of the committee members had went away and did some research and found that some of those guides, and we provided as a tool to give out to folks should they want to do some repairs and just don't know where to start. But it gives a list of examples, not an exhaustive list in that terms of reference of work that you can do that's not statutory. Like another one is advising council on changes to bylaws, policies that impact heritage matters such as official plan policy, zoning bylaw amendments, property standards, bylaws, and so on. In the past, when we were doing an official plan update, the staff person leading that would come to the Heritage Committee and ask for their thoughts on some of the policies that we have. And those conversations and feedback would be used to inform, maybe refining some of those policies. And it's certainly not your statutory role, but one that we would really value. So anytime we're updating something that had something to do with heritage, but isn't part of a bylaw necessarily, or the Heritage Conservation District Plan or any actual designated properties, we still would want feedback if we could get it from the committee. And we go to other heritage or other advisory committees for those things as well, where it makes sense. Another example in here was like funding initiatives or it could be like best practices that you learned from one of the training sessions at a conference or the CHO newsletter or something like that. And talks in the terms of reference about the frequency of meetings. It talks about how you'll operate and deputations and things like that, just like it did in the procedural bylaw, but a little bit more specific to the committee. And I think that's probably all I need to do about that. We've put those as resources in your package. If you feel like reading the procedural bylaw and memorizing it, we're always happy for you to do that. But we expect to be the resource for you should you have questions. And if we don't have the answers, we'll get them. Just like we talked about earlier, we're happy to go ask other experts that we rely on, like in clerks or other folks, to get some a bit more detail if there's a question that we don't know the answer to.
Very good. Thank you for that, Denise. Any questions or comments from the committee? No? Okay, wonderful. And for those that are just following along, we are moving on to item 6C, which is the committee code of conduct.
And I just realized opening it that I didn't update the presentation, so it just has Matt Smith on here. So I apologize for that. I thought it was the code of conduct itself. So I just kind of flipped it into the meeting. I didn't know it was the actual just presentation on what is a code of conduct. But I will just zoom through a couple of these. So it talks about what are the municipal act requirements in this presentation, and that the advisory committees and volunteers have a code of conduct that they're expected to adhere to. And usually it's signed. So it's something that we just with staffing just hadn't gotten back to. And so we're hoping that we can just maybe get you to sign one of those at an upcoming meeting. So if we don't have it in front of us today, we'll make sure we get the actual code of conduct for you. So since 2019, the Act has required councils to adopt up to a code of conduct for council and members of local boards. So we extended that into our local committees as well. So the Act reads that a municipality shall establish codes of conduct for members of the council of the municipality and its local boards. So we had already had a code of conduct for advisory committees before this requirement was put in front of us, and that bylaw was 2016-23. I remember filling out one myself when I was on the Heritage Advisory Committee. And it requires the municipality to appoint an integrity commissioner to investigate complaints. So if there were a code violation, there would be a process to look into it. So the Code of Conduct Policy Statement, the municipality of Meaford values the important contribution of its volunteers, including advisory committee members, which are appointed by council. Volunteers are expected to carry out their duties in a manner consistent with the municipality of Meaford's values of respect, integrity, and community. And the purpose is a written code of conduct helps ensure a common basis of acceptable behavior. These standards demonstrate how volunteers conduct themselves as ambassadors of the municipality of Meaford. So some details about it. The code does not replace or supersede any other statutory provisions like a human rights code or the municipal act. The general principles and values are supporting the mission, vision, and values of the municipality, respect decision-making processes of council, maintain professionalism, integrity, respect, and trust, promote open, accountable, and transparent local government, and encourage public respect for the municipality, its bylaws, and policies. Standards of behavior and conduct, the enforceable stuff. So dignity and respect without abuse, bullying, intimidation, discrimination, and harassment. Legislative requirements include workplace harassment and violence policies, obviously decorum, meeting decorum, refraining from public criticism that questions reputation, competence, and credibility. And I think what's important is that's a lot different than asking questions or just disagreeing with someone's opinion, which we encourage you, if you don't agree with something, to just tell us that you don't agree with something. If you can't recommend it to council to approve something, disagreeing with other members is not a problem. It's the criticism, and maybe we wouldn't want you to go out in the public and say, I didn't agree with the rest of my members, and then disparage the committee later. Once the committee has made a decision to vote in favor of something or against something, you're kind of one entity now. So we wouldn't want to see members go out and criticize that decision. But we don't expect that you will agree in your meetings on all things, which is totally acceptable. That's why we vote, and it's important to have that public discussion and debate to try sort of flesh out questions and issues as they come up. So definitely want people to feel confident in having some respectful disagreements occasionally in the committee where you don't agree with something that someone's doing, or you don't agree with what one of the other members' opinions is. That's okay to voice. Respecting staff, the will nots. So you don't injure the reputation or compel to engage in political activity, interfere with staff duties. Advice that is politically neutral based on expertise and objectivity, devoid of undue influence. And only council as a whole has the ability to direct staff. So more enforceable stuff, fulfilling. So the code of conduct would include fulfilling the mandate in terms of reference of the committee. So you've got your terms of reference of what your work is. Respect due process and authority of the chair and council. Demonstrate respect and give fair consideration to a diverse viewpoints. So that's where it's okay to disagree, but just respecting that people do have their own opinions. Representing the community and contributing to a meaningful and constructive manner, support committee recommendations, and does not act in a manner whereby personal benefit could be obtained, and declare conflicts where necessary. So if you feel, I think lots of people will err on the side of caution when it comes to a conflict of interest. If they feel uncomfortable, certainly people have to declare a conflict. It's not something we go after someone like, hey, I think David's got a conflict. I'm going to tell him he can't vote on this item. That's something that everyone declares based on their own conscience and their own knowledge. And if you have questions, we're happy to help. But we would never tell you to declare a conflict of interest. Just trying to, whoops, I think I went too far there. Go back. Here we go. What if there's a complaint? So I think, and Councillor Forder mentioned this earlier about the integrity commissioner. So they would investigate complaints if one came in. So these are the examples of what sanctions could happen. And they're usually pretty mild because the intention isn't to beat anybody up or make people quit or do anything like that. That's not the point. But it would be, sometimes there's a reprimand or an expectation of an apology at a meeting, written or verbal. Occasionally, someone could be removed from a committee or removed as chair. If there was remuneration, which you're not, I mean, we are getting your free labor right now, so you get to come to the committee and we don't give you anything for it other than good company and feeling good about being part of the community. But in some cases, committees are given some kind of remuneration, council, for example, and they could have suspension of that money, or return of property or reimbursement. This is certainly a fun presentation to give, so I apologize for if it was dry material. And I'm betting that most people just agree with most of this in our everyday lives. But it's good to have that code so it's out there for the folks that maybe aren't always acting in the best interest of everyone. But I'm happy to take any questions on that if anything was unclear, and we can go back to any of the slides.
Questions, comments from anybody? No? Okay. That was great. Denise, thank you for that. And so that looks like that concludes the educational component of today's agenda. And we're going to be moving on to items for information. Item 7A is the Ontario Land Tribunal Appeal Heritage Permit HER 05-2025.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Chair. So I just wanted to bring this back. I'm doing this with other committees as well as it comes up. So I'm just letting you know that this particular permit was appealed and that the basis of the appeal is that they disagreed with the conditions that were applied when council approved it with new conditions. And they've also appealed their site plan. So I've just let council know that this week, just on Monday as well for their information. And then I'm giving you the same information pretty much. And just to let you know where that feedback loop comes in, we'll be following along with this process and participate as needed in the tribunal's process. I don't have a lot of details about how this one will proceed, but typically we would be notified of an appeal and we would file the paperwork. So Haley did most of the work on that and to put the paperwork into the online system that we have now and got it all in the portal. And then over time, we will be alerted if there's any kind of event. So if example, if there's going to be a pre-hearing conference or one of those types of formal events that the tribunal would set up, we'd be notified of that and we would participate as needed. And that could be providing experts, it could be having our lawyer participate as needed, depending on the situation. So we haven't been given much information in follow-up yet because we've only just filed the appeal documents recently. And we expect that the heritage permit and the site plan will be rolled into one matter that would be considered together because they're pretty integrated. So this was just to let you know that this appeal happened and make sure that the committee had that information should there be rumors out there in the world and you think, oh, we just looked at that one, and that you have all the information available to you. A lot of this happens sort of behind the scenes, so we don't deliberate or negotiate with developers on these appeal processes in a public forum, but where we can knock off issues, things that don't matter, we will try to do that. And then if there were something like a settlement proposed or some of the issues resolved, we would bring things back to council should we need direction of what council's wish would be on the next steps. And I'm happy to answer any basic questions. I don't have a lot of detail on this particular one, but if you had questions about the process, we could fill in some of that gap as well.
Questions from anybody? Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward for now. Denise, thank you kindly for that. So we're going to move on to item 7B for those following along. It is the Heritage Conservation District Plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be hoarse by the end, I think, of the meeting. You're hearing from me a lot. So this one also is for information purposes. I wanted to let you know where we were. I thought we were one step back from where we are, and I'm really excited to know that we have a draft that we can start to, get into a final form, like a workable form that we can present to you in the next meeting. And my thought was, when you think about all the work we're doing in this fall, so we're doing this training now, talk about like, hey, reorient with what the committee's role is and some of the things that I can provide. Then we're going to have Bert do his training in a few weeks. I think you'll be in a good position to talk about some of the updates stuff, which you might not have been in that position had we not had all this extra training, and kind of bring everybody into the same level playing field, so all the members have the same information to move forward. So I'm really happy about the timing and how it's coming together. To just take you back, the original contract with our consultant was awarded in 2021, and they started working on reviewing our Heritage Conservation District plan. There was a few events, which I outline in here, over the next couple of years. So there were some project steps that I talk about on page 2. There was an original project kickoff, and then the opportunities or the challenges and opportunities report was shared with the committee members. And then there was a expectation to update the policies and provide some drafts to the committee and to the public and council, have a public meeting, and then prepare the final for approval. At some point, we got paused with some staffing changes, and we have had a number of people change over in our department and in the corporation over the last couple of years, which has created a bit of a backlog of work. And so because of that, we didn't advance the project. What's happened is I've gone back through to see where we were, and I've contacted NPG to see how things landed, and we do have a draft update. So we're going to work with what we have there. We did have a presentation from NPG at the public meeting in July 2023, and also to the committee, which I've linked in here. It went through some high level information and just let the committee at that time know where things were going. And in here, I wanted to let you know where the steps were. I think rather than going back to the beginning, we had a heritage committee at the time that had been, in place for some time and were very experienced. And so I think the information they provided and feedback was pretty good. And so I'd love to bring to you sort of where we are now for feedback, and we can refine that a little bit if there's some good conversation around what things we might want to add or improve, and then maybe go and next step to council with some of those improvements, and then to a public meeting. So what I did was give you a bit of a timeline of what I expect to do based on the information I have been able to reorient to and build that the file back to where we were. If we were to go to the next meeting in December, we would bring you that draft and probably do a bit of a presentation on some of the proposed changes. And then my suggestion is we do a second public meeting, because we didn't, at our first public meeting, we didn't have a draft to really look at. Have a second public meeting in the winter following the feedback of this committee. And we probably will go to council in between there as well with an update for them. And then let council make a decision based on the public feedback, committee's feedback, and all of that. And then hopefully we will have our updated policies in effect spring 2026. One of the things we learned from our consultant last time was we couldn't really make significant major changes to things like the boundary or throw the whole plan out and write a whole new one or anything like that because of the way the act has changed. So we were just going to work to refine what we had to make it more user-friendly, more usable in general. Like, does it give a better guide? Right now, we've noticed like sometimes it gives for suggestions without more meat on the bone, so to speak. So it's kind of says, well, you could do this or that, but it doesn't really say, you shouldn't allow these things. And sometimes it does say that. One of the examples is, people who have original brick shouldn't be ripping off the brick and then putting up siding, for example. But it doesn't necessarily give the tools for if in a case where something was falling off, what do we do? We've had some struggles with some of those policies where we don't know what to do. And the guidance wasn't strong enough to help us. And so that's what the intention was with our consultant, was to try to figure out if we can do a little bit better to provide that set of guiding policies. Like in those cases, what would we do?
Great. Thank you, Denise. And Will, I believe you had a question. Please go ahead.
I just have a question about the map. It's, what I've got is the Heritage Conservation District. It has the outline, but it doesn't have all the streets in here. So I'm kind of confused as to some of the streets that are missing, and the outline is correct, but it's not really an overview of a town map. It has some of the streets, the major streets on there, but some of the smaller streets aren't on this map. So it doesn't really give me an indication as to some buildings are in it or some buildings aren't, because I don't really have all of the streets on this. So if they could update this on perhaps a municipal map, then it would give us, people that live in the area, it gives them a better idea where they are and where the district stops and where it doesn't. Like, I'm looking at one place and it looks like the front properties are in the district, but behind them, those buildings aren't behind it. So that's where I'm a little confused here, and I'm thinking, if we're going to use this map to define where it is, it should have all the streets, I would figure, on it.
So you're looking for more detail in the map?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. And that's a great suggestion. We can certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just get back to my agenda here. Very good. Do we have any other questions or comments with regards to the Heritage Conservation District Plan update? No. Okay, that's well received. Denise, thank you very much. Look forward to working on that in the future. Next, item 7C is another item for information here, the Community Heritage Ontario 2025 Summer Newsletter. And hopefully we've all had a chance to read it over. Any comments or questions with this item at all? No. One thing that I will note from reading that was there is mention about the Ontario Heritage Conference success this year, which of course we had 2 of our members attend. And this was in Prince Edward County. And it does mention that the conference itself did earn very strong praise for its engaging programming, the excellent venues, and there is a very strong collaboration between Community Heritage Ontario, Architectural Conservancy Ontario, and the Ontario Association of Heritage Professionals. So it was nice to see all those bodies coming together and a lot of synergy between them. And it is also noted that next year's event will be hosted in Hamilton, and that'll be June 18th to 20th. And the theme is going to be focused on adaptive reuse of industrial heritage. And I think Hamilton is the perfect location for that. So very much looking forward to checking that out. And hopefully some of us will be fortunate to go and see it in person. So that's wonderful. And I don't think there's any other questions or comments with regards to that. So we'll receive that. Item number 8 on our agenda is committee inquiries. Do we have any inquiries from anybody in the committee today? No, looks pretty good. We're still processing all the educational information. I think that's what's going on here. Wonderful. So going on to number 9, communications. The committee will consider correspondence received by members of the public during each meeting. To share your comments, thoughts, or concerns with the members of the committee, the public can send an email to clerk@meaford.ca. When emails are received to this email address, they will be compiled into a correspondence list, which is then distributed to committee members prior to the meeting. The cover sheet of this list will be included on each meeting agenda. The contents of the correspondence list are not included on the public agenda to protect the privacy and personal information of those residents who choose to send in their thoughts and comments. And there is nothing else on the communications list here. So we have our next meeting. It's crazy to think it's going to be December, but Wednesday, December 10th. Looking forward to that. And with that said, I'll be happy to conclude today's meeting, and thank you for your time, everybody.